Okay, so let's talk about data fetching. As we saw in the last lesson with the loading widget, we can now make functional components that return page content asynchronously. Because of this, we can forget about get static props and get server-side props and do our calls right within the function body. Similar to what we did here with this promise, since we can now make our functional components asynchronous, we can use a fetch call right within this function itself, getting rid of the need for get static props or get server-side props. We can also provide things such as a revalidation interval within the fetch, as well as data on if we should cache requests or not, basically distinguishing between server-side rendered and statically generated content. I'm going to create a new root called time. So I'm going to do that by creating a new folder, call it time, as well as a page.tsx file, and I'm just going to quickly populate that with a bit of boilerplate. And what we're going to do here is we're going to pull code from the time API to simulate the different ways that we could do these requests. So I'm also going to make this an asynchronous function. To show how this works, I'm going to get data from the world time API. The link for this can be found in the description. I'm going to create a basic fetch call to it. So const response, I'll call it, equals await fetch. You've probably seen this sort of thing before. I'm going to do const JSON equals await response.json. Get that, and then I'm going to do const time equals JSON, and this is going to be date time. Let's come down here and just render this out. See what we get. Perfect. So if I come over here and I refresh this a few times, you're going to see that the value doesn't change. And this is because Next.js by default will cache the response. This you can think of being pretty similar to get static props without a revalidation interval. If I go on here and I add cache and I add a field of no store, what you're now going to see is that whenever we refresh this, we're going to get a new value. You can almost think of this as the same as get server-side props, in the essence that every time this endpoint is hit, it will revalidate this. Let's see what happens. If we go here and we create value of next, and we do revalidate 5. You can probably guess what this is going to do if you've used Next.js in the past. Every time we update this, it's not going to change. However, every 5 seconds, this will be revalidated. Perfect. There we go. So now you can see not on every request it's updating, but every 5 seconds or so, this will change. So what if we want to retrieve data from an ORM? I created a sample Firebase query here in the base of our page, as well as I added the necessary configuration file for that to work, and I just created a collection called blog with a random document with a string called testing that has the value hello from ORM. If you come over here, you can see that this works and we can pull this successfully using this query. However, what if we want to change the actual behavior of how this is pulled? Well, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add some different variables that we're going to export from this page. So the two variables we're concerned with here are revalidate and dynamic. If we make revalidate 0 and we add force dynamic as our dynamic value. This will, it's hard to see the actual difference, but this will act like a server-side rendered function, and this will basically be the same as if we used get server-side props. However, if we do something like error, or we could have done force static, and then we'll do something like, I don't know, 30, this will basically make this function act like get static props, as well as have a revalidation interval of 30 seconds. I know this has been a lot to digest in this lesson. However, I do believe that this will get a little bit easier working with an ORM. Right now this is a little bit confusing, and the documentation can explain it way better than I can in a few-minute video. There are also a lot more other configuration variables that come into play. However, what about get static paths? What about generating our actual dynamic routes? There's a very different way of doing this in Next.13, as well as then generating the metadata for each of these dynamic routes. This is what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. So if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.